Alcatraz, still escape-proof after one of the most desperate attempted prison breaks on record.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the things you need to know but may not believe about the infamous island prison Alcatraz.
When's your birthday?
I don't know.
Geez, what kind of childhood you have? Short.
Number 10. Cellblock D was for the worst offenders.
I wasn't on holiday, Babs. I was in solitary confinement.
Oh, it's nice to get a bit of time to yourself, isn't it?
Alcatraz was intended for the worst of the worst. But where did the worst of them get sent? That would be Alcatraz's Cellblock D, home to the Hole, which was a generous way of saying solitary confinement. Inmates were often sent there as punishment, subject to even harsher conditions than they were normally used to. The Hole itself consisted of a series of cells at the end of the D block, which were bare save for a sink and toilet, and prisoners held there were essentially forbidden from ever leaving their cells. Don't believe us? Take it from inmate Henry Young, a bank robber who testified in 1941 that he was given only 2 meals in 2 weeks, and that bathing consisted of a bucket of cold water.
I haven't seen a new guy in 6 months. It's nice to talk to people. How the Brooklyn Dodgers doing?
Moved to L.A. 2 years ago.
Oh? Kidding?
Number 9. The First Lighthouse on the West Coast. If nothing else, Alcatraz is a fascinating historical site, even in ways you might not expect. The appropriately named Alcatraz Island Lighthouse was indeed the first of its kind in its region, and was initially completed in 1853. It was considered a necessity at the time, a means of facilitating the gold rush and navigating the dangerous shark-infested waters near the island. One of 7 lighthouses approved by Congress to be built in California, the Alcatraz Island Lighthouse was the first to be up, running, and operational. Although that lighthouse was torn down in the early 20th century due to structural damage, its replacement has stood stalwart and relatively intact since. Number 8. The Warden Had a house on the island.
If you disobey the rules of society, they send you to prison. If you disobey the rules of the prison, they send you to us.
While it's hard for us to imagine wanting to literally live next to Alcatraz, we can appreciate the fact that it must have been a pretty short commute to work. Situated directly next to the aforementioned Alcatraz Island Lighthouse, the Warden's house was built in the 1920s and is estimated to have contained anywhere from 15 to 18 rooms based on available records.
Alcatraz is not like any other prison in the United States. Here, every inmate is confined alone to an individual cell.
To that end, wardens were often known to host cocktail parties at the mansion. As if that wasn't quite luxurious enough, the dwelling also contained a greenhouse, which well-behaved inmates could be trusted with tending. Maybe going to Alcatraz, or at least one part of it, wouldn't have been quite so bad after all.
Unlike my predecessors, Wardens Johnson and Blackwell, I don't have good conduct programs. I do not have inmate councils. Inmates here have no say in what they do as they're told.
Number 7. Alcatraz's location was chosen for its difficulty to escape.
Now, no one's ever busted out.
No one's ever made it. Everyone here has looked for a way out, but there ain't any.
Of course, we should mention that that wasn't for lack of trying, but we'll get to that soon. For now, though, just know that its location was selected precisely for the harsh conditions surrounding it. Just a mile offshore in the San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz Island was selected as the perfect location for a federal prison that would be built in 1934.
This island is solid rock. See that water? It's over a mile swim to land. The currents make it seem like 10. The water's so cold, it will numb your arms in a matter of minutes.
That owed to the ice-cold waters surrounding the island, as well as their choppy, dangerous currents. Perfect for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Hoping to make a drastic move that would help to stem the flow of an ongoing crime wave, we'd say the Bureau made a fittingly off-putting choice.
Let's say you're going to try it anyway. First, you've got to get out of the cell. Each bar has 6 hard, smaller bars set in a steel tube with extra steel poured in. And there ain't no way to turn it out either.
Number 6. Escape attempts were surprisingly frequent.
I was sent here because I was 22 years old. I was a high escape risk. I had escaped from every place I'd ever been. And I was very bitter and angry and very combative. So they weren't going to keep me in an institution where rehabilitation was the main factor.
We can definitely understand the desire to, not want to live in Alcatraz anymore. So, with that in mind, it's probably not shocking to learn that 36 prisoners attempted 14 escapes. Of course, as the world's most infamous maximum security prison, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park. 23 of those prisoners were apprehended while making their not-so-great escapes. 6 were killed in the process, another 2 drowned, and 5 more, well, that's another story.
This is a man that feels he has no future. He's going to wind up dying in prison, so why not take a shot at it?
Security was tight. The ratio of guards to inmates was much higher than in other prisons, about 1 officer for every 3 prisoners.
Despite 53-degree water and currents in excess of 6 knots, inmate Joseph Bowers became the first man to attempt an escape, albeit an unsuccessful one given that he died soon after of injuries sustained during his attempt.
Joe Bowers, who was regarded by a lot of prisoners as being a little bit crazy, tried to climb a fence in full view of a tower guard, who of course shouted out some warnings. Bowers kept climbing the fence. They shouted out again, and they warned him, and he kept climbing the fence, and they had no choice but to shoot at him. And they shot him, and he dropped down the other side.
Number 5. Al Capone enjoyed playing the banjo there.
You could take a look on any other mug shot, and you'll see the name on there with it. But this is the only prison that I've ever been in where my name was a number.
Number 85 was the legendary crime czar, Al Capone.
Chances are you've heard of this guy. One of the most legendary gangsters who ever lived, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known simply as Al or Scarface, was the notorious boss of the Chicago outfit. But his reign of terror ended in 1934 when he was sent to Alcatraz for extensive tax evasion.
At Alcatraz, he apparently tried to maneuver his way around the warden, but was completely prohibited from doing so, and he became the cell house sweep. To my mind, one of the worst jobs, because you hardly leave the cell house.
Although his tenure there was brought to an anticlimactic end when his worsening neurosyphilis necessitated his release on medical grounds, Capone seems to have made the most of his time at the isolated island prison. He was allowed to practice his banjo playing in the shower, a privilege seemingly unafforded to other inmates, and even managed to get away with further illegal activities while behind bars.
What's your name? Al Capone. I thought you was dead. Me dead? I got too much money. I'll never die. Say, you play poker?
Number 4. Alcatraz was once a military prison.
Alcatraz was cutting-edge technology for Army fortresses during the 1860s. At its height, when the Civil War ended, Alcatraz had 129 cannon mounted on it, which is more than Fort Sumter and Fort Pulaski, the famous East Coast battlefield forts combined.
Long before Al Capone, long before Henry Young or Joseph Bowers, Alcatraz was designated as a United States military reservation by President Millard Fillmore. During the Civil War, Confederate sympathizers were jailed at what was then known as Fort Alcatraz. Some years later, after being designated as an official prison of the U.S. military, it held American citizens suspected of treason, then captives of the Spanish-American War.
Fortified gun emplacements were constructed for cannon that weighed up to 7.5 tons. A 20-foot-high defensive wall stretched more than 500 feet. The entire rounded top of the island was leveled to a plateau to accommodate the barracks building known as the Citadel.
Just a few decades prior to being established as a maximum security prison, it also jailed conscientious objectors to World War I. Although dozens of powerful cannons had been set up on Alcatraz's perimeter to defend it during the Civil War, they were never used, and today make fearsome photo ops for tourists.
It mounted 5 guns that could fire 15-inch diameter cannonballs weighing 440 pounds, ranges up to 3 miles.
Number 3. The Birdman didn't keep birds there.
Robert Stroud was one of the most repugnant inmates that has ever been housed with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He was a malcontent that ran away from home at the age of 13 from supposedly an abusive father and became a pimp from Detroit, Michigan, all the way to Juneau, Alaska.
This one's actually kind of a famous misnomer. Seattle-born Robert Stroud was initially imprisoned at the penitentiary at McNeil Island on charges of assault, manslaughter, and murder. He He was transferred to Leavenworth Prison in northeast Kansas following violent incidents at McNeil, where his life took an unbelievable, wholly unpredictable turn.
Stroud's out on the rec yard inside the segregation unit and comes across 3 baby sparrows that are injured and decides to pick them up, and he takes them back to his cell. Once he gets them back to his cell, he makes a makeshift eyedropper into a device where he can feed them.
In a remarkable true story, Stroud became a respected ornithologist, caring for and raising some 300 canaries in his time there. Unfortunately for Stroud, his bird keeping was a major source of ire for the prison's officials, and he was abruptly transferred to Alcatraz after it was discovered that he was making alcohol in his cell.
From my point of view, he was a manipulator, he was a conniver, he liked chaos, he liked turmoil. Yet he was, physically, he was a coward as far as I was concerned.
Stroud was given only 10 minutes warning of his expulsion, after which his brother took ownership of his birds. Number 2, no one ever officially escaped.
I may have found a way out of here. You looking at something?
Of the 14 escape attempts made at Alcatraz, none was ever described by the facility as what you might call successful. However, while no one officially escaped from Alcatraz, some attempted escapees were never caught, alive or dead. The second ever escape attempt from Alcatraz, orchestrated by Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, is mostly theorized to have ended in death by drowning for the two. Their bodies were never found despite an exhaustive search.
I'm gonna start digging, so keep an eye out for the bulls. You see one coming, you start whistling, huh?
Most famously of all, though, was the June 1962 escape attempt, conducted by inmates Frank Morris and brothers Clarence and John Anglin. Although they too were never found, their escape has become the stuff of pop culture legend and was later adapted into the hit 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz.
I figure it. The cell block's really getting old. The moist air is corroding the concrete, and the salt is rusting the metal. I took a nail clipper. I was digging around the grill at the back of the cell. I think with some work I could dig that grill out of there, enlarge the hole, and get into the utility corridor, which leads to the top of the cell block.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, the Native American occupation. Before you ask yourself why in the world anyone would purposefully want to live at Alcatraz, just let us explain.
Their live-in protest gained national attention. Today, Dr. Leneda Warjack, who led the occupation alongside Richard Oakes, is heading back to the island to instead lead a tour. As the boat approaches Alcatraz, traces of their decades-old demonstration come into view.
Beginning on November 20th, 1969, 89 Native American activists stormed the defunct prison site and set up shop there, primarily led by Richard Oakes and Leneda Means. The protest group intended to argue that the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie ceded all unused U.S. territory to the country's indigenous peoples.
It was exciting. We wanted to do something to help our people in fighting for treaty rights and enforcement of our treaties. Is the only thing that we could do that was positive in the right direction.
Given the fact that Alcatraz had been shuttered some 6 years earlier, it made for the perfect headquarters. The occupation fell apart once Oakes' 13-year-old stepdaughter Annie tragically fell to her death, but stands as a historical symbol of Native American resistance and independence.
We can't help but be who we are, and this was the place that we wanted to occupy, and it had international press. So the media is really important for us. We could live or die by the press.
Which crazy fact about the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary shocked you the most? Are there any we missed? Be sure to let us know in the comments below.
Nobody's ever escaped from Alcatraz, and just represented something strong having to do with law and order. We need law and order in this country.